we have existing industries and organizations to build around, but if we do start to think about this really big and really go for it, we're going to have to prepare our workforce. So I think we're really going to have to start thinking about creating clean economy training programs to support people pivoting into new jobs. And importantly, and we think about this a lot at the Clean Foundation, is we've got to give youth opportunities to gain critical experience in the clean economy. This coming recession, we'll call it, is looking like it's going to be very tough on those coming out of high school and post-secondary into the workforce. We need to continue to support them as much as we can. You know, so many of these clean economy ideas aren't just good for our provinces as a whole, they're very beneficial to our individual citizens, as they can help get help on like home upgrades or even start a new career, an exciting career path. But right now, as we sit here, before, like, while decisions need to be made, we know that a clean economic recovery will require thoughtful, coordinated, forward-looking planning. With strategic post-COVID investment, we can definitely help make green jobs a powerful tool in the recovery toolkit. You know, just part of a broad toolkit I think we'll need, but a very important part to help in both the short and the long run. So I think we're going to need all levels of government to work together to create conditions for many more green shovel-worthy projects to help build back better. And thanks to Lisa for inviting me here. And I'm very excited to hear the ideas of the other speakers both today and next week. There's clearly no one magic bullet here. We're going to need a diversity of ideas that lead to smart policy and program options, and that will ensure we don't go rolling from this right back into the climate crisis that, you know, we know it actually never left. It's still there. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Scott. And I think that also helped to cover some of the things that, you know, we might not get to talk to with individual speakers today, but some of the points you made also I think haven't been brought up as much, like around biodiversity and youth, and so it's a good way to start the discussion here. So next, what I'd like to do is invite Lyle Goldberg, who is Policy and Regulatory Affairs Manager for CanSIA.
Great. Okay. Can everyone see my PowerPoint?
I can't see it yet. If you hit, I don't know if you hit the share screen button at the bottom, Lyle, that might be the challenge.
Just a sec here. Sorry.
Nope, no worries.
Let me get out of this. Share screen.
It should be a green icon.
Yeah. Can folks see that now? Hello?
No, I still don't see it.
It worked in the initial one. Oh, well.
If you want, Lyle, like, we can move on and I can have Greg go, and then we can come back after you to see if there might be some technical difficulty there.
Duplicate swap center.
Would that work for you?
Yeah, sure. Or I can just, yeah, okay, that's fine.
Okay, we can do that. So what I'll do is we'll just do a little switch here. So I will welcome Greg Robart, who is CEO of Smart Grid Innovation Network, based in New Brunswick. We're really happy to have him here with us today. And actually, between CanSIA and the Smart Grid Innovation Network, I'm sure there's actually quite a few things they have in common. So there'll probably be some common themes there. So I'll turn it over to you, Greg.
Good afternoon, everybody. I will ask, can everybody see my screen?
It is all good. I can see it.
Okay. Great. So first off, thank you, Elisa, for the opportunity. I think this is a great initiative. And I think I'm going to premise my slide by reiterating that we were asked to come up with a big idea. I have no preconceived notions that this idea will be easy or short in duration. It is a transition, it is a journey, and I'll walk through what our group has come up with. So just 2 seconds about Smart Grid Innovation Network. So we're an organization originally founded by Siemens, MB Power, and UNB. We have national aspirations, and our mandate is to support the clean energy transition sector through education, policy, business model innovation, and technology. We have supported about 26 companies, benefited from our technical and business support services. These are our grid edge vendors who are trying to get their product to market. We've held a couple, I want to call them top-notch energy conferences in Atlantic Canada, hosted by or attended by about 300 people and top-notch presenters from all over North America. Energy trade missions. In the fall, we supported a mission to Europe, 3 countries in 4 days. We took 12 companies from across Canada and had 2 keynote presentations in London and Zurich. And we hold knowledge workshops. What is smart energy? How can it benefit society? In December, we had a well-attended event called Finding Common Ground, Fighting Climate Change with Smart Energy. And that's just some of the things that SGIN does. So our proposed big idea, leaning on what Scott had tabled, which is one of the cheapest way to enable low carbon emissions is to electrify loads with zero emission renewable sources. No region, as far as I'm aware, no region in Canada has accomplished this. As far as I'm aware, there's no region in the world who has accomplished this. And if you look at the graph on the right-hand side, we are on track to not hit our targets for 2020 based on the Pan-Canadian Agreement, and also not hit our targets by 2030. Our trend is still up, not down. Present COVID event aside, these numbers were put together before that, but our trend is still in the wrong direction. Our proposal is to fully electrify Atlantic Canada by 2040 as an ambitious but viable goal to enable our decarbonization aspirations. The technology exists, the will is the question. And just a little bit about what needs to be done to enable a goal like that. Propose we break it down into 3 major components. Policy work, and that is a mix of human resources, standards, regulatory, decision support tools, clean energy, which is topics like marine renewable and solar, cleaning up the generation that we put on the grid and use from the grid, and cleaning up end uses, primarily from heat and transportation, which is a significant portion of our loads, but also includes smart communities, smart buildings, and smart systems, as in energy and industry 4.0. So with that, I'm going to stop and pass it back to Elisa.
Great, thank you so much, Greg. I'm gonna see if I can close your screen share. There we go. Okay, great. And I think the electrification piece is also gonna be probably important to a lot of things that all of us are gonna be talking about today. And it looks like Lyle's probably good to go now. So I will turn it back over to him.
Okay. Can everyone see that?
Yeah, you are all good. We can see it.
Okay, great. Before I get going, I did want to mention that the Canadian Solar Industries Association and the Canadian Wind Energy Association is merging as a single organization. So we did send out a media release earlier this week. And if you want to get a copy of that, just let me know. But we're going to, effective July 1st, we will be the Canadian Renewable Energy Association, and we will be responsible for solar, wind, and energy storage. So we're very excited about that. Just in terms of opportunities for solar in Atlantic Canada, as you can see from the slide, there's a lot going on right now. The Nova Scotia Solar Homes program has been a game changer in Nova Scotia with over 2,000 applications received thus far, 9 megawatts of solar installed, $1.5 million in energy savings. On the utility scale side, we're seeing, so we've got a couple of smart grid projects, one in Amherst and one in Shediac, New Brunswick, creating some solar farms there. The Alternate Resource Energy Authority, which represents 3 municipal utilities in Nova Scotia, is building 3 solar projects, utility scale at least 6.5 megawatts. City of Summerside, 21 megawatt solar farm. Great opportunities with the integrated resource plan with Nova Scotia Power, which is charting the energy mix for Nova Scotia over the next 25 years. And we envision wind to play a key role in that, but also solar and storage. So we're very excited about that. The Nova Scotia government passed the Sustainable Development Goals Act in 2019, which mandates 100% net zero carbon by 2050. And certainly we envision, solar to play a key role in that. The province announced the Green Choice Program, which will enable all federal facilities in Nova Scotia to be 100% renewable energy. And we envision other large emitters to be able to participate in this program, whether that be on the industrial commercial sector, perhaps universities, perhaps municipalities. So we're very excited about that. There are some challenges in Nova Scotia. We'd like to see virtual net metering, which enables people to access solar that don't live in a house. Maybe they live in an apartment or they don't have a house that has a proper roof for solar. So that would be where people could participate in a program where they would lease or own a percentage of solar panels as part of a large project to help offset their bills. And we also have a 100 kilowatt net metering cap in place, which prevents some of the larger commercial, industrial, and institutional customers to go solar. So we're actually launched a campaign to eliminate the 100 kilowatt net metering cap, and we've got about 5 letters into the energy minister thus far. And then in terms of what benefits would solar PV bring to Atlantic Canada if it received investment, we've submitted a series of recommendations to the federal government on a green stimulus package. And one of those ideas we have is to create a national federal rebate to support rooftop solar for households, businesses, and community buildings. So it's a federal ask of $1 billion, $500 million for the residential side, where rebates would be up to $10,000, similar to the Solar Homes program here in Nova Scotia, but also $500 million nationally towards a commercial and industrial rebate up to $200,000. So we would envision, a portion of this money going to Atlantic Canada, which would be a great way to boost the current Solar Homes program and the PEI solar program, which are currently oversubscribed right now. So more funds they need more funding to continue those programs. And we would also indicate that this program would really be a good launch to develop more commercial and industrial solar in Nova Scotia and Atlantic Canada in general, where the payback period for solar on these buildings is a longer payback period. So having a rebate for these folks would be excellent to get the ball rolling on solar for larger solar customers. So that's it. And there's my contact info should folks want to reach out to me. Thank you very much, Elisa, for having me present.
All right, thanks so much, Lyle. And I think now we will go to Kieran Hanley, who is Executive Director of NIA.
Thanks, Lisa, and thanks to Marine Renewables Canada for organizing and for the opportunity for us to present some of our ideas. There couldn't be a better time, obviously, for all of us to throw all of our cards on the table and talk about the low carbon economy transition, hopefully not a low economy transition. NIA has no shortage of big green ideas, but the one we've been asked to speak about today is the development and application of clean tech in Canada's offshore oil and gas industry. So I'm going to share my screen so you, with a couple of slides, so you don't have to look at my ugly face for the rest of this. For some, big and green and oil and gas might not be ideas that gel very well together, so just let me set the stage for that. The world's demand for energy, as you can see, is increasing still at a steady rate. The growth in renewable energy consumption has been substantial over the last 10 years. But also true is that the consumption of oil and gas has grown at basically the same rate. So it is clear that renewables alone is not going to be the sole answer needed to help the world meet its 2050 greenhouse gas emissions targets. Urgent action is definitely required. But such fundamental changes in the economy, infrastructure, and consumer habits, they're just not going to happen overnight. So that's why this word transition is often used. It's not an immediate switch, and it can't be. If the world has any hope of really meeting all those objectives of emissions reductions, the reality is that changes within the oil and gas industry has to be part of that solution. Canada can be a major contributor to that solution because we are already very well positioned. The type of oil in our offshore is highly attractive because its grade is the least impactful from an environmental perspective to process. And the extraction of oil in our offshore is among the least carbon intensive in the world, 30% below the global average, in fact. Can we do better? Should we do better? Absolutely, 100%. And that is the big green idea, pushing the clean tech envelope to become the world's most environmentally progressive oil and gas producer. We're going to have to. In a world where energy is cheap, as with any industry, you will either get by being a high volume producer with lower operating costs, or by providing a high quality product. We're not going to be a high volume producer, and the greenhouse gas intensity of one's oil is quickly becoming one of the key indicators of quality. Canada's offshore needs to be among the best to be successful. Some might ask why. Why not let the industry here just whittle away? Well, consider that the offshore industry for Canada provides over 34,000 direct and indirect jobs, almost $3 billion in labor income, and $2 billion in taxes and royalties revenue each year. In a region as small as Atlantic Canada, it is hard to overstate what that means for our economy and how difficult that will be to replace. Globally, whether or not Canada's offshore oil is produced makes no difference from a supply standpoint. Demand doesn't change, and the supply gap will simply be filled by other countries like Saudi Arabia, Russia, the US, Iraq, Iran, and so on. But the supply will be dirtier oil. So if Canada can provide the world with the least greenhouse gas intensive oil on the planet, reducing overall global emissions, isn't that a worthy pursuit? We are in the midst of that energy transition, and we need to treat it as such. In Atlantic Canada, we can't influence the global demand for oil, but we can set the standard for how it is produced and how it is provided. There's great economic opportunity in doing so. So what do those opportunities actually look like? Most of the emissions from Canada's offshore operations come from the large generators that are found on the platforms or the FPSOs. The solutions that exist to address those represent major clean growth projects. One approach is to electrify offshore operations via a subsea underground cable that brings clean energy from the shore. This is being done in a couple of jurisdictions in Europe, most notably Norway, where hydropower is cabled to offshore platforms. Well, guess what? It just so happens that we have a wealth of hydropower in our region that can be used in the exact same way. The second approach is to generate clean energy in close proximity to the operations, or in situ, as they would say. The most likely candidate, of course, in this case would be offshore wind energy. Offshore wind development requires many of the same capabilities and skills already found in offshore oil and gas, so we are well positioned to pursue this. This is a very realistic endeavor, and this could very well end up being Canada's first offshore wind farm. What a symbolic representation of the energy transition that would be. Those are significant initiatives that will yield big-time GHG reductions and significant economic activity. But beyond the platforms themselves, there are many opportunities for clean tech innovation throughout the enormous offshore supply chain to reduce emissions. Day-to-day operations can be refined, supplemented by various types of equipment upgrades. Electrification, that's going to come up over and over again in this discussion, can happen throughout the entire supply chain, including on vessels, in the ports that that help support the industry. New approaches to digitalization and remote operations can be used to reduce the need for transportation back and forth, whether that be by boat or helicopter, which of course is a greenhouse gas implication. The list of possibilities is a vast one because the supply chain is so vast, and that presents us with a great opportunity for innovation and activity. I spent most of this time talking about emissions reductions, and that's the most urgent need, obviously. But beyond that, there are other areas for significant clean tech R&D and application. Environmental characterization and monitoring is a really good example. Atlantic Canada is already home to a surprising number of SMEs with world-class products and services that help us understand our impact on the ocean environment and the ocean environment's impact on our operations and our economy, whether that be by laser, radar, sonar, subsea, high-def video, or so on. That expertise wouldn't have been developed without the offshore industry, and it's indicative of the opportunities before us if we embrace, in a strategic fashion, becoming the greenest oil-producing region on the planet. In economic development, the greatest opportunities for diversification are often referred to those as being the adjacent possible. How do we leverage our expertise in one area to expand activity in another? Pursuing environmental excellence in this multi-billion-dollar industry is a pretty good place to start and represents a big green idea. The solutions we develop here can set the global standard, and our expertise and technologies can be exported worldwide for the betterment of the planet. So that's my big green idea.
That's great, Karen. And actually, it's a very good segue to our last piece, which is going to be on marine renewables. And I'm going to just spend a few minutes on that. I'm just going to get my PowerPoint here for everyone to see. Okay. So Atlantic Canada has some of the best marine renewable energy resources in Canada, I would say, but also in the world. And I also will note the drawing that you see is my best attempt at showing all of the different types of marine renewable technologies together. So tidal, wave, river current, and offshore wind. And no, I did not draw that, and neither did my child. It's actually part of a video that we put together that's on our website. So that actually will give you more information if you're interested in these resources. And I would just say that's just a little pitch to check it out. But although marine renewables is not as mature as solar and onshore wind energy, it does represent a next generation technology that can provide significant amounts of clean electricity, create jobs, spur local economic development, particularly in places where there's been downturns, for example, in offshore oil and gas, fishing, tourism, as a result of the pandemic. So we've already seen the impact of some of the early domestic tidal energy projects in Nova Scotia and international offshore wind developments in engaging a local supply chain. And so some of you that are in the Dartmouth or Halifax area, this is just one example, may have seen recently that there was some activity at Woodside that is actually to support a offshore wind project in Virginia. So that was just a little bit of activity here, but you can just imagine what that would look like if you saw it. There's also some photos online, what that would look like for if you had our own industry here. So we have unique tidal and also offshore wind resources. They're untapped. And so my pitch to this and kind of my big idea is why not take advantage of them more? So I'll start with tidal. And some of you may know that there are currently a few projects permitted in the Bay of Fundy in the Minas Passage, but also some smaller community scale projects in the Digby area. And these have received feed-in tariffs, permits, approvals through the government of Nova Scotia. Some of them have received funding from the federal government. But what all of them will be getting or have at this point are they're bringing private sector investment to the region. And so that's really important. That's what we want to see with economic recovery and economic development here. And we're also seeing ongoing interest from tidal energy developers that want to develop more projects in the Bay of Fundy. And all of these will create new jobs, supply chain opportunities, and engage local services and suppliers. So this is going to end up being a bit of a busy slide, but what it kind of looks like right now is almost like a whiteboard, and then I'll be putting ideas up as I go along here. But essentially what we need to do with the projects we currently have and those that might be coming in is we need to ensure successful delivery of tidal energy projects. And then perhaps we can also be thinking bigger about how do we create an opportunity for more development and innovation. So more projects, more innovation here around technologies that are supporting it, like other ocean technologies. And to do that, what's really needed is first, we need to look at how we de-risk the sector and help attract private sector investment. So that can be done through different financing. One thing we have been looking a lot at is different government measures that could be put in place. Obviously, things like capital cost grants are really helpful, but there are a lot of other, even tax measures, things that allow for flow-through shares that could be really helpful for attracting investment into the sector. We also need to look at how do we get electricity to market, so better electrical infrastructure, not just for projects here, but if we ever look into the future and the potential for exporting electricity to the US, for example, that will be something that is needed as well. And then there needs to also be collaboration around environmental, the potential for environmental impacts to ensure that regulatory barriers are addressed and that also stakeholders have a good understanding of what the potential risks of these projects are. So now moving on to offshore wind. One thing I've heard a lot of people say when we took offshore wind onto our mandate a number of years ago was that it's never going to happen in Atlantic Canada, or maybe in Canada in general. And so today, since we're talking about big ideas, what I want to put out there is that I think it's an opinion, or it's my opinion, that it's too big of an opportunity for us to really ignore. And we have been going after it from an international trade and business development perspective. But we also have that opportunity to look at it more seriously in Canada. So just to give you an idea of what that opportunity looks like, the US Northeast offshore wind market is right now projected to be a $70 billion market. And we already have Canadian suppliers working there, a lot of them Atlantic Canadian. The IEA also is projecting that by 2040, it's going to be a $1 trillion global industry. So why not explore it in Atlantic Canada and see if there's that potential to pursue this kind of industry. So a few reasons why this makes a lot of sense, and I'd say a lot of these also go for are true for tidal energy. One, that we have great renewable energy resources with both tidal and offshore wind here. A lot of places don't. There's also going to be increased electrification. Greg talked about that, the need for that. And as there's more electrification, there's going to be more of a demand for clean electricity. There's also potential for offshore wind and sometimes also tidal to partner with other markets. So hydrogen production is something that a lot of people have been talking about recently. There's also synergies with oil and gas, as Kieran mentioned. So that's also an opportunity there. And then we also have a very experienced supply chain that has transferable skills. So a lot of these companies that have been working in oil and gas or offshore oil and gas have a lot of opportunity to work in these sectors here, also internationally, but obviously looking at things close to home is always attractive. So I think one of the things is the question I'm just going to talk about a little bit is why aren't we already doing this? And I think a major challenge is the fact that there's a lack of an electricity market particularly for offshore wind when it's such a large, the projects are quite large. And we don't have the ability to export to the US at this point in time. There's also a lack of a regulatory system right now, and work also needs to be done to understand the domestic potential better. So understanding the best sites with the least amount of conflict. So if we were to really try to look at what the potential is for offshore wind in Atlantic Canada, I think the best thing to do is first to start with an assessment and studies that can help identify some of the high potential areas. So that requires no real commitment at this point, but just builds an understanding among industry, government, and stakeholders of what the opportunity looks like and where the best sites would be. Another possibility could be a pilot project, something at a much smaller scale. Obviously, that would require quite a bit of support. And then I think what we are doing and want to continue to do is also ensure that Atlantic Canadian companies are engaging internationally in the offshore wind sector. And finally, I think long-term, looking at what the potential for building up more electricity infrastructure to bring on more renewable energy, that might also help with a focus on offshore wind at some point. So that's everything for me on the marine renewables side of things. And so what I thought we would do now is go into the Q&A. I see that we have a number of questions that have come in from the audience. And so what we're going to try to do, I'm going to try to get to as many of them as I possibly can. I'm just going through it right now, but one thing that I will throw out to the panelists is we didn't have a lot of time for each of us. So one thing I'm wondering is just if you could talk about maybe the number one constraint right now that you see is a barrier to your idea or options that you're proposing. And so maybe Lyle, I'll start with you.
Sure. I did mention this in my presentation. I think the 100 kilowatt net metering cap we see as a huge barrier to advanced solar in Nova Scotia, and that same cap is in place in all four Atlantic provinces. So that's probably one of my number one priorities here, to get rid of that. And so I'm working with Nova Scotia Power now to see if there's ways that we can deal with that. And I've also launched an advocacy campaign working with several companies like Killam, Dalhousie University, and others who have written the minister to suggest, here's how this is impacting me, and this is what we need to do to get rid of it. So, so I think that's probably our biggest factor right now that we'd like to address. Ontario and Alberta have done that. Alberta is up to 5 megawatts that you're allowed a total. And even if we went back to our original legislation, which is 1 megawatt as opposed to the 100, I think we'd be fine. So that's kind of, we're working on different solutions.
Great, thanks so much, Lyle. Maybe I'll move on to Kieran now. And just a reminder to all the panelists, if you could turn your video on when answering questions, that would be great.
Yeah, so I guess the biggest impediment with respect to what I talked about, I think industry needs to make a pretty clear commitment and establish what its priorities are in this regard. And I think that that process was well underway before the crisis hit. And to be honest, I think that after the both economic and health crisis over the past couple of months, that work seems to have accelerated to a great degree. The other side is government has to be a real engaged partner in this. When you look at jurisdictions like Norway and the UK, who are currently the leaders as it comes to oil and gas and clean tech, and where those two worlds meet, the government is highly active, engaged, and supportive. So I think those two things need to happen. I think that they are happening, and I think we are getting to that place. So hopefully it's kind of smooth sailing.
Great, thanks, Karen. And now I'll just move over to Greg with that question, just like a key constraint. And I think with yours too, it was it's quite what you're proposing is obviously a major project, an initiative across Atlantic Canada. So there's probably lots of constraints, obviously, but if you can talk about one that would be a focus.
Yeah, I think one is what's the best way to word it? It has to be a concerted effort by all top layers, and otherwise we end up with individual projects solving individual problems for individual goals versus an end game that everybody agrees to. And for me, the number one thing would be to get all our governance in place and who are the champions and put that all in place first. I think we know that the technology is out there. We know this is all possible. What we need is the will and the concerted effort on seniors who can have a strategy, drive a plan, and execute. That's where we got to start.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Greg. And now I'll move that over to, I don't know if Greg is, okay. I'll move over to Scott. You've touched on a number of things, but I'm wondering if there's one in particular, you could talk about a constraint that you're noticing, maybe around electric vehicles, but I'm open to whatever you kind of want to touch on.
Yes, thanks, Elisa. Yeah, one of the things we're trying to get our head around now, and most of the things I mentioned were at sort of the residential or community scale, is just thinking about how the programs that we've had in place now will be best set up in the years ahead, especially during this recovery phase, where we may not be able to rely on participant cost share in the same way. There's certainly, like at small business level, going to be much less appetite to take on debt to support projects. So I think there's going to have to be some level of thinking around how we incent participation on projects. And the other, well, I've sort of two comments. Another would be like, we need to rapidly increase the ambition on how many projects we are putting forward. I think we can get trapped into sort of like an incrementalist mindset. Like, we've had a program, it's been successful, maybe we can do a little bit more next year. I think we're at this point where we have to blow it all up and think way, way, way bigger. So that it takes political will and holding your nerve and taking risks. And some of those things are going to have to reach into some of the stuff that Greg talked about when you have a smart grid, because a lot of these technologies and projects have interplay in between them. And as if you can see into the Q&A, Lucas has made a couple points about batteries. I mean, I think batteries can have a big part of that, and we also have an unbelievable starting point for a battery industry in Nova Scotia between his lab and Jeff Dong's. So it's like ambition and risk taking from a policy standpoint for me is the biggest barrier.
Okay, yeah, perfect. And I have a lot of questions coming in now from the audience, so I'm going to do my best to try to get to some of them. Actually, the first one that came in was directed to you, Scott, and it was, what kind of projects are within reach for low carbon energy production?
I think all of the panelists could maybe take a stab at answering that question. Yeah. For sure, but I'd say most of them, yeah. Most of them are in reach. Like, we have in Atlantic Canada a lot of experience at different types of projects. Wind, I mean, community wind was around 13% PPAs. I think if you went back out right now, and don't hold me to this, it'd be half the cost. And we've seen a solar industry grow, so there's a lot more there. I mean, the things we need to, I think about from a broader policy standpoint is investments in the grid, regionalize it, get more access to a base load that allows us to integrate more technologies into it, which I know is part of the plan, and there's been some setbacks, but there's still more to be done there.
Did anybody else have any comments on that one? Kind of what's the, low-hanging fruit here? What is some of the first ones we could be looking at for projects, and maybe in your individual sectors? Yeah. I thought Lyle, maybe on solar, or whoever would like to take that one first.
Sure. The solar homes program, like I said before, just from a residential, we have a lot to do on the utility and community scale with solar if we're really going to grow it in Nova Scotia. But the solar homes program has been a game changer for sure, because there's financing options. What I find, even in my own subdivision, one person gets solar and then they talk to their neighbors, and now there's a bunch of people in my subdivision that have it. So but certainly moving to community scale solar through virtual net metering is imperative if we're going to grow solar in Nova Scotia, because many Nova Scotians still can't afford a solar system, even with the incentive program. And B, certainly with an HRM, a lot of residents live in apartments, so they don't have access to solar. So allowing regulations for virtual net metering to allow them to lease panels, to participate in a program where they can access that to lower their bill will be crucial to reduce carbon, move us more towards renewables, and address GHG emissions.
I was just going to make a quick comment on that, nail on the head. Transmission infrastructure is really one of the key enabling activities that we can do to unlock the renewable energy potential in Atlantic Canada. We have enormous resources, no matter what kind you want. Solar, onshore wind, offshore wind, other types of water power, hydro, whatever you want is there. The problem is we can't get it to where it needs to go. So that's where the primary focus needs to go in terms of large scale projects.
All right. Okay, sorry about that, everybody. We're having a bit of a Wi-Fi issue here, but I think everything's okay. I was worried everybody was going to be gone when I got back on this. I can still see the Q&A too, so that's good. So one of the other, there's a little bit of, there's some discussion around electrification. And this might be one that I'm probably going to throw to Greg and Kieran here. So looking at electrification and the fact that there's potential to do that for oil and gas as well with platforms. The question is, wouldn't it be best to use electricity for end use loads first? And then the second part of that is, isn't there excess products on platforms that have to be flared anyway? I don't know, Kieran, I know that you're not necessarily in the oil and gas sector per se, but I thought you might have a few comments to that, and then I thought Greg might be able to kind of follow up on it with the electrification side of it.
Yeah, I'm not an engineer by any means. I'm in economic development, but I do know that the natural gas, I think that you're referring to, that is flared. Yeah, you're correct that something would have to be, something alternative would have to be put in place to deal with that natural gas. The first option would be probably to re-inject it back down. But there's other things that can be done as well. But that question is probably best for an engineer for sure.
Yeah, and I guess the concept of electrify everything includes end uses as well as generation. So that includes transportation, it includes heating for homes, and it includes greening our electrical infrastructure. And I mean, in Canada, we're actually not that bad. We're 82% non-emitting now across the country, which is pretty good when you compare ourselves to a lot of other countries. But there's still room to improve. And where we're going is, if we all head towards the same goal of electrify everything, then all of the conversations that are going on here become relevant, and the transition of the oil and gas industry and their role in it during transition is absolutely key. And this isn't about picking an industry. This is about all of us heading towards the same goal.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. One thing I mean, because we're focusing on economic recovery and how these projects, like I think a lot of the discussion we've been talking about, how these are good for climate change goal or action on climate change, environmental goals. But one thing I'm wondering if we could talk a little bit about is around, how is this going to, how are some of these things going to engage the local supply chain? And are there actually gaps in the supply chain that we'd have to be concerned about at this time? And how quickly could we get people up and working on some of these projects? Maybe I will start with Lyle. I'll start that with you. So let's just say big picture, there's investment in these projects and they move forward. Do we have the people here now that can work on them? And so would this local supply chain be benefiting?
In terms of the supply chain for solar, yeah, there's a wide gamut of things. We're not going to make solar panels in Atlantic Canada. It's not going to happen. It's largely dominated by Asia, mostly China. I think we do have, as Scott indicated, I think our research we're doing around battery storage with Dalhousie bodes well for us to do something in that area. Also, I think around the area of decommissioning, recycling, we have a strong history here of waste recycling as well as mercury recycling with CFL light bulbs and so forth. Solar technology is still relatively new, and the life of a solar panel is typically around 25 years. So we've got a lot of time to figure out how we in Atlantic Canada perhaps could be leaders on the decommissioning process. In terms of solar installers, we're actually working with Electricity Human Resources Canada to develop national occupational standards for a solar installer. And those will be actually ready in the summer. And so that provides a great baseline for solar companies looking to hire someone. And NSCC is doing some training, a 45-hour course for solar installers. It's a bit complex because the solar industry, what makes a good solar installer? Well, some of them are good roofers, and there's engineers that design the system, and then there's electricians that have to install the system. So it's quite complicated in terms of the labor force. But I think we're working on that in Nova Scotia, starting with our training of solar installers. And we've actually allocated a certain amount of spots for Indigenous communities as well as African Nova Scotian communities. So I think we're doing some of the right things.
Great, thanks so much, Lyle. Maybe I will turn that over now to Greg to talk a bit about supply chain engagement with the electrification piece. And I think maybe one thing that might help with that discussion, because that's obviously big, is what do you see as some of the primary skill sets that would be required to get engaged in that?
Yeah, so I'm going to propose that we have a decent skill set in, I want to say, the technical world. So we have strong engineering schools in Atlantic Canada. Do we have the right quantity? I'm not sure. But do we have good technical skills? Yes. Do we have enough labor force to do all this work? I want to say probably not. Where I find the biggest gap is, when you say the word energy transition, there are very few people who understand the full implications of what that is. And when from regulatory down to interoperable IT systems, to the electrical implications, to turning off of existing assets, what about business models, what about financing? The complications around energy transition are quite large, and it's not just a technical problem, which I think we could get our heads wrapped around as, in Atlantic Canada. I think the rest of it is a lot more challenging.
Right. And then Kieran, I'm just curious, like for supply chain, and I think one of the points you made was if we were to see offshore wind for in situ powering of oil and gas platforms, that's obviously very similar skill sets. Like there's a lot of transferability. Is there anything else around that you would point out with local supply chain and some of the projects that you mentioned?
Yeah, well, on that piece, I think we've done some research to look at the supply chain that exists in Atlantic Canada in offshore oil and gas, and how that would transfer to offshore wind. And it's a very, very good complementary list, to be honest. There's a few areas, mostly to do with obviously the manufacture of certain items, but as was mentioned before, Atlantic Canada is not likely to become, the home of massive manufacturing of these things. But when it comes to anything in and around the water, whether it's offshore wind or hydro or other forms of marine renewables, tidal wave, we are experts in Atlantic Canada for any work in and around the water. So we're very well prepared to deal with that. I can't speak for the other provinces, but I know that there are some large engineering firms in Newfoundland and Labrador that are they're actually the project developers for things like onshore wind for some projects in Ontario and beyond. So I think the short answer is, we have the skills, we have the expertise. Of course, there's going to be some holes to fill, but I think we're well positioned to take advantage of whatever supply chain opportunities there are with respect to clean energy production.
Yeah, and I would agree with that when it comes to the marine renewable side of things, just given the tradition of and experience we have in a lot of those sectors in Atlantic Canada. Scott, we're at time, but Scott, I just wanted to give you the opportunity if you wanted one more kick at the can on this topic around supply chain. If not, we can move to closing.
I'll make one very quick point. Many of the things we're talking about here are inherently local. The companies that do the work do something physically on site. So these jobs are in every community in our region if we want them to be. And the people who work for these companies are not just the engineers and analysts. There's administrators, accountants, marketers, jobs of all types. So if we increase activity in this sector, in these type of projects, we increase employment generally across the board. And we have an opportunity to do it with a social equity lens, which I think we are obligated to do so, given what we are, if we're tasking ourselves for shovel worthy and build back better.
Thanks, Scott. I think that was actually a very good way, a very good last comment to wrap this webinar up. And so what I'd like to say first is just thank you to all of you, the panelists that joined us for this. It was a bit of an experiment to see how it would work. And I also want to acknowledge that most of us could probably have an hour session on each of the topics that were presented today and dig in deep. So I recognize the audience there might have been things that you were interested in hearing more about and we couldn't get to today. But I think this is the beginning of a dialogue we would definitely like to continue, whether it be around the economic recovery piece or just generally, how does Atlantic Canada work together and how do our sectors work together to move things forward in a sustainable and resilient way in the future. So what I would also like to remind everybody that we have a webinar next week. It's going to be talking about a few different topics. So energy efficiency and renewables, green building, bioresources, ocean tech, and nuclear energy. So I noticed some of those things came up during the Q&A. And some of those questions will be answered, or topics will be touched upon next week. So thank you everyone very much for joining us today, and we hope to see you all again next Tuesday. Thanks everybody.
Thanks. Great idea.
Bye.
Bye.